Imagine a moment in the early 1950s, a sleepy, conservative France, still shaken from the war and only just beginning to rediscover a taste for cinema and glamour. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a single movie scene shatters the peace. A teenager stands on a sunlit rock, golden hair sparkling, lips parting as she steps into the frame, and she's wearing the most infamous bikini in film history. Her name, Brigitte Bardot. The film, Manina, La Fille Sans Voiles, or for the world, Manina, the girl in the bikini. And in that breathtaking moment, the deeply hidden desires, fears, and rage of post-war French society came tearing into the open. This is the real, scandalous story of what happened behind the camera, and how a small, sun-bleached movie changed its stars and its audience forever. The story didn't begin on the beach, of course. It began in Paris, in smoky production offices and with the nervous laughter of a director named Willy Rozier. Nobody thought this little adventure film would become a cultural bombshell. Rozier, by all accounts, wasn't a star director. He was persistent, a survivor in the French film world, willing to push rules, looking for his big break. And his big break, it turned out, was a 17-year-old girl whose mother dragged her nervously to auditions, clutching the script tightly and praying things would stay decent. Brought up in a strict, artistically inclined Parisian family, Brigitte Bardot's parents were deeply suspicious of film people and the moral dangers lurking behind those studio doors. But Rozier, who'd spent years crafting B-movies, saw something in the teenage Bardot. Audaciously, he wanted her not for her acting. She'd never truly acted before, but for her sunlit face, her natural beauty, and, above all, her fresh innocence, untouched by cinema's tricks. He knew his film needed scandal, needed the shock value, and he was utterly unafraid to chase controversy. The problem was, French censors and Parisian society were completely unprepared for what he was planning. In 1952, no respectable French woman would be seen in public in a two-piece swimsuit, let alone on film. It took courage, or perhaps recklessness, to even suggest such a thing. In the early days of the shoot, whispers about the unusual scenes started spreading. The crew, many of them seasoned, old-school technicians, kept glancing awkwardly in Bardot's direction, torn between appreciation and discomfort. Her mother hovered around the set constantly, shooting hostile looks at Rozier and running interference with the camera team. Bardot herself, then all wide eyes and hesitant smiles, was thrown into the deep end. Rozier, with all the subtlety of a tank, tried to win her over. Playing the charming mentor, complimenting her looks, promising stardom, even as everyone knew the only real star power here was the bikini itself. But what might surprise you is the bizarre mix of shame and excitement in the air during filming. Bardot, given her age, was technically under the protection of French labor laws and her parents' authority, but Rozier negotiated fiercely with her family, bending rules and making ambiguous promises about which shots would appear on screen and which wouldn't. At times, he would shoot long takes with Brigitte gazing out to sea or playfully scrambling over a rock, only to announce, last minute, that he needed just one more, a little more energy, pushing the physical and emotional boundaries further each day. However, none of this prepared the team for the chain reaction that followed when word of the film's subject matter spread beyond the set. By late summer of 1952, rumors had reached Paris. A girl in nothing but a bikini? And she's not even 18? The phone at Rozier's production office kept ringing with angry moralists, tabloid journalists desperate for photographs, even members of the French clergy threatening legal action. Bardot's mother fiercely demanded assurances that her daughter would not be exploited. She wanted script approval, editing room access, and even tried to halt the most risk sequences. At one point, she stormed off set, nearly halting production altogether, after Rozier slyly arranged an impromptu beach shot that revealed more skin than was agreed. The entire venture teetered on the edge of collapse, with financiers wavering and Rozier swearing that everyone would benefit in the end. And benefit, they did, or did they? Because mere months after its quiet release in France, Manina, La Fille Sans Voiles became a lightning rod for controversy across Europe and beyond. Newspapers published stills of Bardot in the bikini, splashing scandalous headlines. The death of modesty, French films go too far. Authorities in Italy, Britain, and even the United States began to talk about outright bans. Parisian clergy thundered from pulpits, while, in smoky student cafes, left-leaning art critics insisted the film was a necessary act of liberation. One misfired publicity stunt, Brigitte photographed on a beach in the very same bikini, ignited even more rage and prurient curiosity, and made her the icon of France's new, forbidden desire. Yet for Bardot herself, the price was immediate and harsh. Family friends recoiled. Her own father, Louis Bardot, was reportedly outraged and considered suing Rozier for corrupting his daughter's image. And at home, Brigitte found herself suddenly the focus of neighborhood gossip, with passers-by whispering about the girl who took her clothes off for the camera. Nay, even some classmates at her Parisian finishing school stopped speaking to her, while tabloids spread half-truths about supposed affairs with elder men on set, a complete fabrication, but one that stuck firmly in the minds of the public. The deeper story, though, is how the behind-the-scenes battles warped all their futures in ways nobody expected. On set, Rozier continued his relentless campaign, not only against the family, but against his own crew, pushing for retakes, ever more daring, often angering lighting men and cameramen almost to rebellion. The location, sun-soaked, picturesque Corsica, became a pressure cooker of resentments and betrayals. Rozier accused his assistants of sabotage when footage went missing. Cameraman Ren Koolhaas nearly quit after Rozier insisted on a low angle for one infamously revealing shot of Bardot. Others later recalled heated, whispered conferences by the shore, with Rozier trying to keep the mother at bay long enough to capture what the public didn't even know it wanted yet. But the wildest drama erupted once the finished film landed at the doors of France's notoriously prickly film censors. Nobody could believe what they saw. A miner in a two-piece swimsuit, sunbathing, running, diving, all with an innocence that, paradoxically, made the whole affair more shocking. French censors argued for weeks, fearful of public outrage and even political consequences if the film went uncut. Rozier refused to budge, threatening to sue, leak the story to international papers, anything to get his film seen. In the end, several regions banned screenings entirely, others allowed only a heavily edited version. Rozier's own wife reportedly left him for a week over the scandal, according to gossip drifting around the Parisian cafe scene. Not satisfied with mere national outrage, Manina, the girl in the bikini, ignited a wildfire across Europe and into America. France's uneasy truce over public morality was shattered. In London, customs officials seized prints at the docks. In Rome, Catholic groups staged loud protests outside cinemas. But perhaps nowhere was the fuss bigger than in the United States, where importers sensed a golden opportunity and marketed the film as an unrivaled spectacle of continental eroticism. American censors, faced with a girl, unbelievably, just out of high school, in a costume banned in many U.S. states, considered an outright ban. Eventually, an edited, sanitized version appeared in some art house cinemas which, of course, only increased demand for the full, forbidden version. At after-hours parties in New York, copies of smuggled reels became prized possessions. The personal cost continued to mount for Bardot. Overnight, she became known everywhere as the girl in the bikini, with all the danger and promise that implied. Offers for interviews, photo shoots, and even marriage proposals flooded in. But the dark side was ever present. Threatening letters, anonymous warnings, and once even a stalker who tracked her down to her Paris apartment, convinced she was corrupting the youth of France. The Bardot family retreated into silence, while Brigitte, for a while, considered quitting acting altogether, so bruised was her confidence and reputation. Rozier, meanwhile, was hailed as a pioneer in some circles, and denounced as a moral criminal in others, branded the man who destroyed innocence on film. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Rozier and Bardot's names were firmly etched into the story of French cinema. And so, as the months rolled into years, Bardot's image slipped from that of a timid debutante to the very definition of French sensuality, a change that even she found hard to cope with. Frantic rumors flew. That she had a secret affair with Rozier, she didn't. That she was forced to film against her will, the reality was more complicated. That her mother had taken bribes to allow the bikini scenes to happen, thoroughly denied, but widely whispered about. The legacy of Manina, the girl in the bikini, was, in the end, explosive. For Bardot, the film's release meant not just unwanted fame, but a shattered relationship with her parents and a plunge into the maelstrom of European celebrity. For Rozier, it brought both fleeting praise and a permanent shadow. Doors in the film world opened and closed in equal measure, and his reputation never quite recovered. The French public, meanwhile, found itself staring at its own reflection, the film forcing a confrontation with ideas of youth, sexuality, and censorship that would echo into the next decade and, eventually, help shape the sexual revolution itself. And yet, in many ways, the most remarkable thing is how accidental the whole affair seemed. Rozier never expected a media storm. Bardot's family never dreamed their daughter would become a symbol for forbidden beauty. Even within the cast, there was shock as the world began to talk, relentlessly, about a film none of them had seriously imagined would be seen outside of France. Some of Bardot's co-stars, older and battle-hardened, tried to get her to enjoy the ride. Others, scandalized, warned her she was ruining her life before it even began. Newspapers in Paris photographed Bardot entering church on Sunday with her mother, a silent rebuke to all who claimed she'd been ruined by fame. Then, just as suddenly as it erupted, things seemed to quiet down, at least on the surface. The box office numbers grew. The international editor's scissors stayed busy. Bardot signed another contract and, within months, was on her way to becoming the goddess of Saint-Tropez, living a new life far removed from that frightened girl on Rozier's set. Her bikini became legend, but so did the thorns that came with it. Paparazzi, late-night phone calls, friendships lost and tabloid lies that followed her for years. The poignant final note? Rozier, never quite achieving another success, faded back into obscurity. For Bardot, however, this single film unlocked something in the public imagination that never quite faded. Long after the gossip and censors, people whispered about the innocence of her eyes, the sunshine of the shoot and the shadows cast by so much fame, so quickly, at so young an age. As the days on the Corsican set dragged on, tension spiraled in ways even Willy Rozier hadn't foreseen. It started as a working arrangement that seemed simple enough. The director, hungry for authenticity and shock value, the young actress, Brigitte Bardot, hesitant, and her mother, MME. Bardot, always on high alert. But with every new scene, lines blurred. What began as creative friction slipped into outright conflict, sometimes bordering on open hostility. The local villagers hired as extras would swap stories about arguments that lasted late into the warm Mediterranean night. Sometimes the whole crew would overhear Bardot's mother, Anna-Marie, arguing in the producer's tent, her voice wobbly with anxiety and anger, while Rozier, never one to back down, pushed his vision harder. One of the most bitterly fought-over moments came during the filming of a beach sequence not far from the lighthouse ruins that dotted the coastline. According to those on set, Rozier paced back and forth, desperate to capture something unfiltered. He wanted Bardot at her most uninhibited, running barefoot and laughing, hair streaming behind her. But what made this scene torturous behind the scenes was the director's insistence on genuine spontaneity. He ordered take after take, sometimes in the chilly dawn hours, pushing Bardot to the point of utter exhaustion. For Rozier, the look of natural joy was everything for Bardot. It felt like being put through a test she hadn't agreed to. Her mother's attempts to intervene, pleading for a break, demanding a limit to the number of takes, only intensified Rozier's stubbornness. This was just the start. As the shoot dragged into its second month, the power struggle became the central force on set. There were nights when Bardot, overwhelmed and uncertain, broke into tears and locked herself in her makeshift dressing room, refusing to come out until her mother arrived. The rest of the crew started to sense the emotional toll. Some grew quietly resentful of Rozier, others whispered that Brigitte was trouble. Either way, the working atmosphere soured. Even meals, meant to be breaks from the stress, turned into battlegrounds punctuated by long, awkward silences. Behind closed doors, Rozier worked to isolate Bardot from her mother, offering empty promises that the world will thank you for this performance, swearing to protect her creative integrity while disregarding every plea for moderation. When Anna-Marie demanded script approval for every scene, especially those involving the infamous bikini, Rozier brought lawyers into the process, citing contractual obligations and threatening legal action if shooting was delayed any further. That summer, legal papers flew back and forth from Paris to Corsica, as both sides dug in. But in the rare intervals when things seemed to improve, a sunny day when Bardot completed a scene with grace, or when Rozier praised the actress's natural beauty in front of the crew, hope flickered. For a moment, it looked like there might be a real breakthrough, like they could work together and finish the film as partners in art, not enemies. These moments didn't last. Almost invariably, a routine production snag or an unplanned spontaneous reshoot reignited the old grievances. One particular day, a sudden rainstorm washed out an elaborate shot Rozier had been obsessing over, and he blamed everyone but himself, Bardot, her mother, even the weather. The safety net for Brigitte was always a mother, but Anna-Marie herself was under immense strain. Friends and family back in Paris questioned her decision to allow her daughter to participate in the film at all. At one point, Anna-Marie considered pulling Brigitte off the project, even consulting with lawyers over potential breach of contract penalties. But Rozier's pressure campaign was relentless. He threatened to sue for lost production costs, warning that Brigitte's name would be blacklisted by other directors. The tension became unbearable. Anna-Marie collapsed from stress and spent 2 days confined to her quarters, while Rozier took the opportunity to move ahead with filming as much as possible in her absence. The intensity on set was stifling. The legal and ethical drama happening outside the camera's frame was even messier. The French authorities repeatedly fielded complaints from Bardot's family and from concerned Parisian social groups. Was it legal to ask someone Bardot's age to film these scenes? How much had actually been shown on camera? Tabloids caught wind of the arguments, leaking accounts of outrageous standoffs between the director and the star's family, fueling an ongoing press circus. Occasionally, the mounting pressure subsided for a moment, a successful day of shooting, or a rare communal dinner at a local seafood restaurant where, wine in hand, Bardot and Rozier exchanged a few tense but civil words. The crew would allow themselves a moment of relaxation, thinking maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. But it never lasted. Rozier was obsessed. Bardot was conflicted. Her mother was receding under the weight of it all. As summer deepened, rumors flew. Newspapers printed wild stories about explicit scenes and emotional breakdowns, and lawyers hovered at the edge, ready for the next outburst. None of this chaos remained hidden from Brigitte herself. The psychological toll was heavy. Friends later recalled that by the end of the shoot, her laughter was different, harder, more brittle, and far less frequent than when she'd first arrived. The set, which should have been a place of artistic excitement, had become a landscape of invisible battlefield lines. Bardot was no longer the innocent schoolgirl invited to a summer adventure. She was at the center of a war, one that would continue to shape her image and self-worth for years. When the final slate snapped shut and the shoot ended, there was no real sense of relief. On wrap day, there were no speeches, no champagne toasts, just exhausted faces, muttered farewells, and the distinct feeling that something precious had been lost. In private, Rozier congratulated himself for getting the shot, downplaying the cost. Bardot and her mother packed their things in silence, leaving the set behind but carrying all the scars, visible and invisible, with them. Eventually, the lawsuits melted away, but the emotional bruises lingered for everyone involved. The movie sailed forward toward its infamous release, but those who'd been closest to the conflict would never forget the price extracted on that lonely Corsican shore. And for Bardot, this was only the beginning. The bruising collision between her ambitions, her innocence, adult ambitions, and betrayals, was now her reality, and the aftershocks would shake her for the rest of her life. After the dust of scandal on set and in the censors' offices began to settle, another, even stranger story unfolded for Brigitte Bardot. Returning to Paris, she did not re-enter the life she'd left. She came back as a sensation, but also as a public target. In post-war France, a culture struggling to define itself in the shadow of conservatism, Bardot was immediately marked as the girl who broke the rules. Journalists waited at her apartment, students tagged along after her in the street, strangers left flowers or sometimes threatening notes at her door. Her world, once mostly confined to her family and a small artistic circle, exploded into something over which she had no control. Family life, already shaken during the production, cracked completely. Her mother, worn down from months of warfare with Rozier and the increasing hostility of Parisian society, became distant, protective still, but now skeptical of every new offer, every phone call, every smile from a stranger. At home, mealtimes grew tense. Her father, who had once set a strict boundary between home and work, now despaired at the endless phone calls from reporters and film agents. Friends she'd grown up with retreated, some out of jealousy, others strictly ordered not to mix with that kind of girl. Social invitations dried up. Bardot's daily world shrank to a handful of allies and her family, who hovered uneasily between pride and embarrassment. Bardot herself reeled. At first, there was real excitement in seeing the rushes of the film and in reading her name in every gossip column, but it quickly wore thin. The public's fascination with her image was violent and overbearing. She was dubbed Lolita years before Nabokov would publish his book. On radio shows and in newsreels, commentators used her as a symbol of everything wrong, or right, with French youth, shameless, free, or corrupted, depending on the speaker's politics. Anonymous letters piled up at her door, sometimes with crude proposals, sometimes with threats. Paparazzi staked out her family's small Paris apartment, hoping to catch a tearful breakdown or a secret lover. Bardot's shy smiles and quiet manners were misread as arrogance, her reserve as proof she had something to hide. Worse, some editors claimed, without any real evidence, that more explicit footage existed and was being suppressed, a lie that haunted her for years afterward. Still, Something transformative was happening. The outcry wasn't just about Brigitte herself, it became a flashpoint for conversation across France and, soon, all of Europe. Mothers lectured daughters about modesty, while fathers argued the old ways had to give way. College debates raged over whether Bardot was a victim, a revolutionary, or simply naive. In arty Parisian circles, she became a cult figure, admired by young photographers and left-bank poets as a symbol of resistance to hypocrisy. Yet, at the same time, right-wing columnists and conservative clergy denounced her example, insisting she was ruining French girlhood and daring lawmakers to do something about it. Suddenly, Bardot became a totem in a far bigger war, about women's roles, about what could be shown on screen, about the future itself. Inside Bardot's home and heart, however, the cost was relentless. She withdrew, spoke less and less to the press, often left parties early, and was photographed looking smaller, more burdened, than the bold starlet the tabloids had promised. Her mother, seeing the emotional toll, tried to pull her back from public life entirely. But it was too late. Offers kept coming. Within a year of Manina, foreign magazines were fighting for her attention, some openly suggesting she move to Italy or even Hollywood. Each new offer only drove the family further apart, a swirl of ambition, guilt, and misunderstanding that would haunt them all. The word scandal became permanently attached to her name. Even after the noise over Manina faded, references to the film and photographic stills from the beach scene resurfaced every time she took on a new project. The public image stuck. Bardot was rarely spoken of as an actor first. Always, she was the girl in the bikini, the walking headline, a vehicle for society's projections and anxieties. Some journalists openly speculated about her love life, inventing stories about affairs with directors or sponsors, faking sightings in cafes around Paris. Bardot's actual relationship struggled. Her boyfriend at the time found himself unable to cope with the constant surveillance and ended things abruptly, blaming the circus around them. Down every path, new obstacles appeared. When Bardot agreed to a magazine profile, the photographer spent an hour demanding she relax and smile like a woman in love, implicitly pressuring her for the same uninhibited look that had fueled the scandal. She refused, and the angry editor ran a feature branding her difficult. At auditions, industry men leered or whispered about the infamous bikini scene, either undermining her talents or implying favors had been exchanged for the role. In interviews, she was expected to perform, either contrite or brash or the innocent temptress, depending on the audience. Still, hope glimmered in brief moments. For every door that closed, another, more daring one opened. Bardot caught the attention of directors who saw beyond the scandal, who believed the public's obsession could be turned to art. She was offered scripts that pushed boundaries, sometimes sincerely, sometimes cynically. In Saint-Tropez, she discovered a small circle of friends who accepted her for who she was. Each summer there, away from the Parisian glare, she found space to breathe and reconnect, if only momentarily, with the girl she had been before the film. Whenever Bardot considered leaving the industry behind, however, fresh trouble surfaced. A scathing editorial in a conservative paper would run, reigniting calls for new censorship laws. Or a fan letter, mailed from as far away as Argentina, would find her, thanking her for changing how young women saw themselves, not as objects, but as people capable of desire, rebellion, making mistakes. International newspapers began calling her the French Marilyn, making her both proud and deeply uneasy. While some saw an icon, Bardot mostly saw the loss of her privacy, childhood, and sense of safety. Meanwhile, cultural debates swirling around Bardot and Manina only grew sharper. In schools and homes, in student assemblies and inside government halls, her name became shorthand for a new kind of woman, outspoken, sexual, free but vulnerable, forever at risk of being defined by others. Feminists began arguing that if Bardot's image could cause such panic, it only proved how fragile the old moral order was. Young women scribbled her name in diaries. Shopkeepers grumbled about the new fashion of two-piece swimsuits, yet teenage girls bought them anyway, dreaming of their own piece of cinematic freedom. As the decade progressed, Bardot's relationship with fame grew ever more complicated. Far from forgetting the old scandal, the press used it to frame every success and every setback. The bikini girl triumphs again. Has Bardot gone too far? Were constant refrains in headlines across Europe and the US. Personal peace always seemed just out of reach. Even as she landed serious roles and garnered critical buzz, Bardot couldn't shake the feeling she was performing two roles at once, herself and society's myth, both loving and hating her. In private moments, Bardot confessed to close friends that she sometimes wished the movie had never been made, or at least that she had not agreed to it so young. At other times, she fiercely defended the film. Whatever the cost, she said, Manina forced people to question their own hypocrisy, to examine why the sight of a young woman embracing her own body was so terrifying. For her, at least, the real scandal was never the bikini itself, but the climate of fear and judgment that followed. By the end of the 1950s, the shadow of Manina still loomed. Old wounds between Bardot and her family never fully healed. Tabloid fabrications became impossible to quash, and new stars were routinely compared to her, always asked if they would go as far as Bardot had in her first film. But whatever anguish, confusion, and loneliness the storm had brought, it also marked the beginning of something irreversible. A slow but unstoppable change in how French, and eventually European, culture spoke about sex, freedom, and women on screen. Bardot, with all her ambivalences and contradictions, became the prototype for a new kind of stardom. Brave, embattled, endlessly dissected but always uncowed. The legacy of her ordeal was not simply that a girl in a bikini could transform cinema, but that one scandal, endured and survived, could help open a society's eyes, even if at immense personal cost to those caught in the blaze of its first, unexpected spotlight.